Something feels off in your relationship, and you don't know if you're picking up on something real or if you're doing that thing where your brain just eats itself. And that question is what we're getting into today. Intuition versus anxiety in relationships, and what they actually feel like from the inside, and why telling them apart is harder than many of us admit. Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, welcome. I'm Cyndi Darnell, sex and relationship therapist working with all kinds of people in all kinds of relationship configurations all over the world. And this channel is where we have the conversations that many of us have in our heads and not out loud. Here we talk about relationships, desire, intimacy, sex, connection, friendships, emotions, grief, and all that stuff that gets in the way. So if that's what you're here for, you're in the right place. Let's get started. So we'll begin today with what intuition actually is. And it's not just some mystical gift that some people have and others don't. I firmly believe that all of us have it to varying degrees. It's the body's process of information in ways that are faster than the conscious mind can catch up to. So, for example, you might notice that something is off before you can name what, or there's some kind of shift in someone's tone, or a pause that feels a beat too long, or a pattern that you've been clocking without realizing that you've been clocking it. Intuition is a knowing that arrives before the explanation does. And in relationships, intuition tends to be quiet. It doesn't usually come in screaming, which is a good thing ultimately. It's more of a low, steady hum and something that stays with you, even when you try to argue yourself out of it or convince yourself otherwise. And it's a feeling that doesn't need to be immediately resolved. It can wait. But anxiety, that doesn't wait. Anxiety feels urgent. It has a quality of now, now, now. It loops and escalates and makes us really feel off. It reaches for reassurance from a partner, from a friend, from yourself, and that reassurance helps for a moment, but then the loop starts again. Anxiety, by its very nature, tends to be future-focused because it's organized around, well, what if and what then and what does this mean? And it's the mind chasing the body's alarm, trying to get ahead of a threat that may or may not be there. And here is where it gets kind of complicated. Because in relationships, both of these things can be happening at the same time, in the same body, about the same person. Now, a lot of us have probably heard this phrase of just trust your gut. And I mean, I've been guilty of saying it myself. But really, it's not the best advice. And here's why. The advice to just trust your intuition assumes that your nervous system is working from a neutral baseline. But the reality is that for a lot of people, most of us, it's actually not. And if you grew up in a home, like I did, where something was frequently wrong, where you learned to read the room, for watch for shifts in mood, to anticipate danger before it landed, your body got very good at scanning. I know mine certainly did. And that is not a flaw. That is an extraordinarily intelligent adaptation because our nervous systems did exactly what they needed to do to keep us safe. But these very same nervous systems don't automatically recalibrate when our environments change. We carry this stuff with us into our future and into our other relationships. And so our bodies tend to be signaling a threat in a situation that is simply unfamiliar or uncomfortable or resembles something painful from before, but it's not actually the same thing, even though we feel like it is. And so this is why the question, is this intuition or is it anxiety, can actually be a bit of a mean question to ask ourselves, especially if we have a history of betrayal or having our perceptions dismissed, or of being in situations where when something felt wrong, it turned out it actually was. So you may have learned accurately that your alarm system works. And you may also be living in the aftermath of that learning in a relationship that doesn't call for the same level of vigilance or alertness. And both of these things can be true at the same time. Now, some things worth noticing about this gap between intuition and anxiety. There is no clean test for this. And anyone, anywhere on the internet who tells you there is selling you some BS. I'll be upfront about that. Practicing being with the difference is a skill, and it's definitely one worth developing, especially if you are someone who is an anxiously attached type and or who also has a very strong connection to your intuition. So there are some textures that tend to differ between the two, and knowing the difference is a critical life skill and a critical relationship skill. So let's look at these. Like I mentioned earlier, anxiety is strong and it tends to loop. It rehearses scenarios and replays conversations and builds cases. And it tends to escalate when you engage with it directly and then calm briefly when you get some kind of external reassurance, and then it will resurface. It doesn't fade away. Intuition, on the other hand, even when uncomfortable, tends to be more stable. It doesn't need you to act on it immediately. It tends to just sit. Anxiety is future-oriented. It's organized around what might happen. And intuition, in contrast, is more present tense. It's less about prediction and more about what's already here, something that you're registering right now, even if you can't fully articulate it yet. And anxiety often needs an audience. It wants to be validated or confirmed or resolved, where intuition can tolerate not knowing for a period of time. It doesn't always demand action. And for people with an anxious attachment pattern specifically, anxiety can be organized around one very particular fear, that you will be left or that you were never really wanted. And that fear is capable of reading neutral or ambiguous behavior from other people as absolute evidence of threat. Not because something is wrong with you, because your system learned that that ambiguity is dangerous. And at some point in your life, it probably was. So the question that's really worth asking, rather than, is this intuition or anxiety, which often just keeps you stuck inside your own head, is, what does this feeling need from me right now? Is there something in your body that wants to move? If so, to breathe or to shake or to cry, that's information. So do it, let it move. If the feeling needs to be spoken, not performed, and not used as ammunition, but actually brought into contact with another person, that's relational information. So bring it when it's safe to do so. And if you genuinely need more data, if something is ambiguous and you can't assess from the inside whether it is what you think it is, that's also worth knowing. And sometimes the body's alarm is an invitation to pay closer attention, not as a verdict about what's already been decided. What intuition rarely needs is to be argued into silence or validated so quickly that you never actually feel it. And here's another thing, and this really matters. If someone has repeatedly told you that your concerns are just anxiety, or you're too sensitive, or that you're imagining things, and then it turned out that they were doing exactly what you suspected, your nervous system has information. It earned a kind of knowledge that doesn't come from a book. It came from experience. And that knowledge deserves to be taken seriously, not as infallible, but as data, just collecting knowledge, collecting information. And then the work over time is learning to distinguish between what your body knows from this relationship and what it's carrying in from others. And that is slow work. It doesn't happen through insight alone, but it's worth doing. Not because your anxiety is a problem that needs fixing, but because you deserve to be in relationships where you can actually feel what's happening rather than constantly managing what might. This stuff isn't simple, and it's not supposed to be, but it's absolutely worth staying with. If this conversation today landed for you, let me know in the comments below. What's something that you struggle with in terms of the differences between anxiety and intuition and how they show up in your life? Have you found ways that have worked for you of distinguishing the difference? let me know. I'm sure others will find it useful also. If you would like to work with me on other kinds of intimacy problems, relationship problems, or ideas, queries that you have about developing the skills to show up in your relationships differently, or invite in richer, deeper, more meaningful relationships, head on over to my website, cyndidarnell.com. It's linked in the description below. I have online courses for different types of relationships and sexuality configurations. Plus, I offer counseling and coaching via video to individuals, couples, and to polycules all over the world. Thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.